Welcome. Good afternoon. I'm Mike Van Dusen, the Executive Vice President of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. It is absolutely marvelous for the Woodrow Wilson Center to host this event with the Stavros Niarchos Foundation and Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. The Woodrow Wilson Center serves as the official and living memorial to our 28th president. As the only president we've had who had a PhD, Wilson was both a scholar and a politician, and he always felt that you needed to get scholars out of their ivory tower and understand the practical problems of governance, and you had to get policymakers away from their inbox where all they can think about is a meeting next Thursday and force them to think 5, 10, 15 years out. We are a public-private institution. We do two things. We convene meetings on public policy issues, providing a neutral, nonpartisan forum for dialogue. And the second thing we do is we bring roughly 150 scholars from all over the world to Washington to do research and writing and interact with people in Washington working on similar issues. It is a pleasure to welcome Vasily Tamas, the Chief Operating Officer and Co-Chief Investment Officer of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation. Mr. Tamas has had an extraordinary career of over 30 years in global finance. He became the COO of the foundation a little more than 2 years ago. You have his bio, but what struck me most was the fact that Vasily speaks 5 European languages. I also want to express deep thanks for the generous support the Foundation has given to important programming here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. We are deeply appreciative. Vasily Tamas, welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center. The floor is yours.
Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. It is with great excitement that the Stavros Niarchos Foundation is supporting the Johns Hopkins Science Program. We find that the challenges and rewards that it will provide in this uncertain world will be unique and especially suited for this very demanding life of this century and beyond. Obviously, they are trying to attract and retain the best minds, and we are here committed to support them in any possible way to make this happen. Our foundation is delighted to be able to help economically, and we have selected very many areas that the expansive mind of our founder some 15 years ago gave us the charge to extend in a vast area in art, culture, education, social welfare, and medicine, and health. And we are particularly interested to select in a very discriminating manner, if I may say, to build the strategic alliances with the best minds in schools around the nation. We have a great speaker tonight, and I understand that he is under some time pressure, so I would let Michael introduce our speaker. And I thank you very much for making this all possible, for being here tonight.
It's now my pleasure to welcome Thomas Stelzer to the podium for his keynote remarks. You have a copy of his bio. Dr. Stelzer has now served for over 2 years as the Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination and Interagency Affairs at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs. He previously served as Austria's permanent representative ambassador to the various UN offices in Vienna. His long career serving in many different international and UN organizations shows he is a true and accomplished international civil servant and member of the Austrian Foreign Service. He has been constantly working for the betterment of people everywhere. Thomas is much younger than I am, but he and I share one thing in common. We both got master's degrees at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, but his is from Bologna, mine is from SAIS here in Washington. Thomas, welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's always great to work with SAIS, to be invited by SAIS. It's the first time that this is a cooperation with the Woodrow Wilson Center and with the Niarchos Foundation. And You have all seen the video of Bologna in the background, where we're standing and chatting to each other. This very tempting video of the Bologna landscape. It's heartbreakingly beautiful. I was just there a few weeks ago, invited to talk to this year's students, to the faculty, on a day which was even more brilliant than today's weather here in Washington. And like every time when I go to Bologna, I ask myself afterwards, why did I ever leave this place? I know that quite a few of you are considering going to Bologna, so you have Bologna in front of you. And I think this is, I can assure you, this is, for everybody who I have ever talked to has been to Bologna, it has been the greatest privilege of his or her life to have been in Bologna. It's a great place, and I hope that many of you will experience that. Now, you didn't get me down here from New York to read a prepared, well-phrased statement written by an assistant to you. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to share with you some of my experience and insight of my work in the United Nations, and more or less prepare a little bit for your questions and answers afterwards. You might wonder why I choose Copenhagen as a starting point for this talk. You know, Copenhagen is considered by many a low point in the United Nations. There is a certain takeaway from Copenhagen that the United Nations have become too big, too unruly to produce any results, that we can't do it, we have to turn to other gremia, to other groups, other fora, to really, which are more efficient to produce what we wanted the international system to produce. I think this is a fallacy, that's a wrong take. You know, this is a misinterpretation of what the UN is doing and what happened in Copenhagen. The UN, so Copenhagen was definitely a key event for the United Nations. And we did not achieve in Copenhagen what we had set out for. But the preparatory process for Copenhagen, in this process the UN showed what it can do. Climate change, the topic. You know, the United Nations is not choosing its own topics to deal with. You know, our member states tell us what to deal with. You know, we get the mandates for certain topics from our member states, and we do not receive mandates on all the issues that we consider important. You know, it depends on the member states. Climate change is one of these typical issues. 5 years ago, climate change was pretty much nowhere. You know, of course, in 2002, we already adopted the convention on which we have been building up a lot of our work. But if you remember, even a little bit longer than 2 years ago, even the US administration didn't consider that climate change was happening. And if it was happening, it was definitely not man-made. In the meantime, if you look back just a year ago to Copenhagen, which assembled more than 100 heads of states and government who came to Copenhagen, exposed themselves to the snowstorms there, and to a topic of which they all knew was going to be extremely difficult. You know, there were very low expectations shortly before Copenhagen that the politicians would be able to bring anything back to their constituents, but they still came to Copenhagen because the topic was important. And there was a lot of guidance by the constituencies of the heads of states and governments to go to Copenhagen to try their best. So this was a UN achievement. UN advocacy. You know, when the two pillars of UN work are advocacy and capacity building, what does this mean? What is advocacy? Advocacy is more or less trying to help all our constituents to assess what is in their interest, you know, and to put certain ideas into the heads of our partners, of our constituents. In the case of climate change, it was a very long road. You know, climate change, in fact, was nowhere before Heiligendamm, the G8 meeting under German chairmanship, which is just about 4 years ago. And you might also remember this one article by Tom Friedman in the weekend edition of the New York Times, Main Street. These were two inputs that put climate change into the center of attention. And then it got its time. You know, time span in the United Nations is normally very limited. Our constituents lose interest. So a topic is pushed to the center, and we have a very short window of opportunity to act on it. During this window of opportunity, we have to make sure to get as far as possible, to bring interests together. You know, the comparative advantage of the United Nations is its convening power. We provide a platform for 192 member states to come together and to assess what is in their interest. Now, this overlap of interest we call consensus. And success in the United Nations is to expand this consensus, to build on the shared interest, on this overlap, and to extend this consensus. To an extent that we can coin this into results, resolutions, conventions, anything that comes out of the United Nations, where our member states come together and try to agree on norms and principles they want others to abide by. And this is what we then call the UN output. Normally, it's conventions. Now, Copenhagen was one of these challenges. Going to Copenhagen to work on a legally binding agreement, which would help us counter the biggest challenge we face today, which is climate change. In fact, a year ago, before Copenhagen, hardly anybody doubted climate change was happening. This was also a success of the United Nations. The Secretary General going out, making it a topic at each of his opportunities, liaising with leaders, having weekly and 2 weekly press conferences with leaders all over the place and bringing them together, convening them, aligning them in Copenhagen, where the United Nations provided the platform to achieve some results. It didn't happen there. Why it didn't happen has quite a few reasons. I can speak freely here. It's an academic environment. This is not intergovernmental. The UN did not really live up to its own expectations and possibilities in Copenhagen. We didn't get the result. We didn't really get all the 192 together to get consensus. This was mainly because there was a small group of 27 countries that got together very efficiently, negotiated a result. But all the others, the more than 160, could not be united, could not be brought to the table. In the United Nations, when we achieve something, it's always a small group of countries, an avant-garde, who pushes the agenda. But all the others have to be kept in the game. We call this ownership building, making sure that everybody understands it is in his own interest that a few work very hard and try to achieve a result. In Copenhagen, we failed. The 27 were working very efficiently, and they did agree on something, what we call today the Copenhagen Accord, which is a little bit exaggerated because it is unfortunately not an accord, it's a paper. But there are several things in this accord which, had it been adopted globally, it would have been a very good base for our future work. But unfortunately, the 27 were working, and when the 150 came, there was never any way to link them to the to the process. So there was a very small group of efficient negotiators and a very large group of countries who were left out. And then at the very end, when it came to the point where we needed to build consensus, it was not there because this buy-in had not functioned. And this is the reason why Copenhagen didn't work. And this is when we look at the global governance scenario today, this is what we are facing, with the G20. The reason why I have to dash off afterwards is to go to Seoul tomorrow, where the G20 are meeting. The group, it's a little bit, G20 is not very precise, as you all know, you all experts, but we call them the G20, who have been coming together for quite a long time on finance minister level. But since the outbreak of the financial economic crisis, which turned into a social crisis in the meantime, they have been meeting on head of states level, first in London, then in Pittsburgh, producing real results and trying to manage the response to the crisis. Many observers think that the steam is a little bit out. The results at the last meeting in Canada were disputed, so they have another chance this week in Korea, where the agenda has been a little bit enlarged. So far, they've only been discussing economic, financial issues, but now development issues are also being integrated into the agenda. So this group of more or less 20 countries, which accumulate 80% of the global economic power, have been very efficient during the last 2 years. The only problem is they're just 20. So whenever they take a decision, this decision only applies to the 20. Notwithstanding that they do combine 80% of the economic power, but the 160 plus are left out. And they do not feel themselves bound to any decisions. So the question is, and that's the big issue today, how do you combine the efficiency of a group of 20 more or less with the legitimacy of a global forum like the United Nations? the 20 and the 192. That's the challenge for which we do not have a final answer yet. We've been working on that, but we have not really found an answer to this yet. And since Copenhagen was very early in the process, we didn't have an answer, and we didn't have a way to bring these two groups together, Copenhagen had to fail. Because one thing Copenhagen made us aware of is that whenever we want to achieve something globally, when we have a global issue, you know what these global issues are, these problems which are much too big for one single country, no matter how big and how powerful it is, to resolve by itself. Also regionally it cannot be resolved. A global issue is a problem without any borders, which can only be resolved in a cooperative, comprehensive global platform. And climate change is a typical one of these issues. So when you want to achieve something on climate change, it's not enough that we have the 20. We have to have all the 120. Otherwise, any legally binding arrangement cannot be implemented. And this is the lesson of Copenhagen. No matter how we do, in the end, the question is, do we have consensus? Does everybody buy in? Is everybody ready to support an outcome? And will they also be ready to implement it afterwards? In Copenhagen, we failed. Now, the reasons for the failure, of course, started long before Copenhagen. Let's step a little bit back. The business of the UN is balancing interests globally. We believe that every crisis which strikes us is the result of unsustainable imbalances. The financial crisis, unsustainable imbalances. The food crisis, unsustainable imbalances. Today we look at a lot of huge imbalances. The role of the United Nations is to moderate between the polarizations, bringing people to the table and try to moderate, shift, try to help everybody realize its own interests to a certain extent in this consensus arrangement. This is what we try to do. And this is why very much, if you look at the world today, where a rapidly impoverishing South is being faced by a North which is getting richer and richer, with a gap getting bigger and bigger. Is this mine? I'm very sorry, I think that's mine.
It's Seoul. Seoul, Korea.
It was mine, but let me just turn this off. I thought I had turned it off, but obviously not. Okay, I apologize. See, this is what the United Nations has been trying to do, moderate between the interests on the topic which are in our pouvoir that have been given to us by our member states. Most of the time, very, very late, at a very late stage. And there are many examples for that. Climate change just a few years ago, terrorism only after 9/11. And there are still quite a lot of issues which are very decisive for the future of the world, which we have not been dealing with. An issue, for example, very important for Greece, migration issues. Greece is the country most exposed to migration. And we have today 250 million migrants globally. Only 20% of them even try to go to the north. But we cannot quantify even what the effect of climate change will be on the migrant situation. We know that 80% of global agriculture is not irrigated. So the slowest changes of rain patterns caused by climate change will have unquantifiable effects on agricultural production, which will have huge effects on people migrating. Today we have 1 billion people hungry already. And with numbers, which are fluctuating. And with the effects of climate change, with glaciers melting, there's a dispute on how fast do the Himalaya glaciers melt, but they are melting. We don't know exactly how fast they melt, but a few weeks ago there was a very sober report in the New York Times by a Sherpa who's been climbing the Mount Everest a few times a year. He said for the first time ever he's been seeing puddles of water in 8,000 meters elevation. So these are really alarming signs. The signs on the wall, we just need to read them. And we know that there are billions of people depending on the melting glacier water from the Himalayas. So if this water is, there's no more glaciers in Latin America. I still remember skiing in Bolivia. There's no glacier in Latin America anymore. They've all melted. So the effect of climate change on agriculture and on the people and the migration, we don't know yet. But we do not, for example, discuss migration yet in the United Nations, because that's an issue which is extremely sensitive politically. Because the North doesn't want these issues to be discussed with the South in the United Nations, because the North is afraid to be accused of human rights violations. There is a human right of free movement, which is not granted to the migrants. It's a very political issue. One day it will arrive at the United Nations at a very late stage. So this is so-called emerging issues which we are preparing ourselves to respond to when member states pass it on to the United Nations. Climate change is an issue which has been passed on. Now, how are we now let's go back to this Copenhagen climate change. I was asked before I came down here, are you talking about climate change? I said no, because climate change does not really fit a whole statement today, because ever after Copenhagen, climate change totally disappeared. We have been experiencing a huge regression in what we had achieved to Copenhagen. Whereas shortly before Copenhagen, the world believed there is an issue of climate change, and that's our biggest challenge. Today's polls tell us that it's totally out of people's minds. Repression, we don't even believe it anymore. It's really far away. And we followed the electoral campaigns in the United States a few weeks ago. Quite a few of the incoming politicians don't believe in climate change. So, but what does this? We cannot really. This is something the world will have to deal with, because the challenge of 50-50. In 2050, the world will have 50% more people living here, but by then we'll have to have reduced CO2 emission by 50%. How we do this, it's up to us. But nature does not negotiate. And if we push it too far, the process is accelerating, and every year or every month which does not have a solution makes solutions more expensive and more difficult. So this is maybe our biggest challenge we are facing right now. How do we advocate the issue of climate change? How do we make our constituents our partners, bring them to the table, and just make the world aware it's in all interest that we save it, that we resolve it. That's a perfect example for an issue which has an influence on every country in the world. Of course, the United States and China together produce a huge part of the CO2 emissions. But the impact is felt in sub-Saharan Africa. It's felt in every country in the world. So this is an issue. Every country has an interest to resolve this issue. We have decided in this whole Copenhagen Accord had an agreement on 2 degrees warming. Limit temperature rise by 2 degrees. But 2 degrees means a lot. It means that the sea levels will rise by more than a meter, the famous meter. But what happens when the sea level raises just by 1 meter that's easy to quantify. And there have been reports on that. We're not only talking about Bangladesh and about these islands, Tuvalu, that will disappear, but we're talking of centers like Egypt. A rise of the sea level by 1 meter will affect 50 million Egyptians. This is very clear. So, how do we bring the world together now to achieve a result, a legally binding agreement to limit CO2 emissions? It's not only CO2. This is just what we are facing right now. Now, with the increase of the seawater temperature, which we have been experiencing, the last 7 years have been the 7 warmest years ever since we have been taking measures. This year up to September, I just had a talk yesterday with the Director General of the World Meteorological Organization. This year up to September is the warmest year ever. It will not be the hottest year because we're in the influence of La Nina, so the next 3 months will cool down a little bit. But it's still expected to be the 3rd warmest year in the history of mankind. So we have the 7 warmest years have been in the last 7 years have been the 7 warmest years, which have increased sea temperature. So we don't know when the floors of the seas and the Arctic will melt, and when the captured methanol gases will seep into the atmosphere. We know that the effect in the atmosphere is 40 times larger than of CO2. But these are issues which are difficult to quantify. Or when the permafrost in Siberia will melt, and also the gases storage there, kept there, will seep into the atmosphere. So these are issues which are right in front of us and which tell us that we have to move very quickly. In a time where the political situation is not conducive at all. We have to face this. You know, in the United States, there are 30 states which depend heavily on fossil energy. That means more than 60 senators are accountable to constituents whose jobs depend on fossil energy. This is something we have to take into consideration, which will make it very difficult to cut back on fossil energy. You know, today there was a very interesting article in the New York Times on how difficult it has become in the States to feed in alternative energy into the energy grids, because the unit price is still too expensive. It's not competitive. So unless we decide some political intervention that sets the parameters for private sector investments in a certain direction, nothing will happen. We will have no success here. So these are issues. Now we are 3 weeks away from Cancun, COP16. It's the next chance. We have every year we have a global conference on climate change now. Last year was Copenhagen. This year it's Cancun. Not very much is happening in Cancun. We have really scaled down expectations for Cancun. There will be no legally binding agreement. Right now, the United States and China are negotiating day and night, in fact, bilaterally, because these are the two biggest emitters. And so we can find a bilateral understanding, which will then make it easier to come to multilateral achievements. And we might have some sectorial achievements in Cancun, in technology transfer, maybe financing for adaptation, for mitigation, but there will be no legally binding agreement. But we hope at least that we can get the ball rolling again a little bit to produce the momentum. So I've been a little bit over my 20 minutes already. I just have been trying to give you a little bit of the idea what we are dealing with all the time. All these many puzzles that it's the biggest challenge for us is to stay in front of the curve. Very often we are reacting. A good example, that's my last example I give you, was the food crisis 2 years ago. You might remember that. April 2008, food riots. Well, we have been dealing with food crisis for the last 20 years. There were several summits on food crisis, many strategies which have never been implemented. But in April 2008, there were food riots in 36 countries, bringing down 2 governments, making food security a security issue. So this was the time when the world turned to the United Nations once more and requested an immediate, comprehensive response. At that time, the United Nations lived up to expectations. And just 2-3 weeks later, the CEB met. CEB means the Chiefs Executive Board. That's a body in which the Secretary General meets twice a year with the principals of the 27 UN organizations. Because the UN is a great example for stratification, fragmentation. It's not coherent. We have all these funds, specialized agencies, other related organizations, 27 altogether, which come together to harmonize the politics. That happened just a few weeks after the food crisis broke out. UN lived up to these expectations, established a high-level task force, which could produce 6 weeks later a comprehensive framework for action, which defines a strategy to overcome the crisis and to lead into sustainable agricultural production to help people feed themselves. But this is only one of the examples, but a good example for when we get the issue very late in the last moment and when a huge miracle is expected from the United Nations. I stop here abruptly so you will have time for questions.
The floor is open, and there are 2 microphones on either side, and we will hand them to you. Yes, down here in front.
Thank you, Mr. Stelzer, for that introduction and speech. I'm Cordelia Chestnut. I'm a Danish SAIS student. I was in Bologna last year, and I'll be on the panel a little bit later as well. I'm hoping to make a career with the United Nations, as I'm sure a lot of SAIS students are interested in international work. during the election campaign 2 years ago, there were proposals set forth for alternative organizations to replace the United Nations. You yourself mentioned the G20 as an efficient alternative. Do you see the United Nations still being relevant in the future? 50 years from now, will we still have a United Nations?
I'll give you an example. Which struck me. There was one of these many ideas to replace the United Nations was this coalition of democracies, which is a little bit out of fashion. But 2 years ago, Senator McCain was very much supporting this coalition of democracies. And I was on a very small panel a few weeks ago with a professor who has written a lot on exactly this idea. And the interviewer asked him and said, how should this coalition of democracy ever replace the United Nations? He said it cannot. He said everybody who ever says that is wrong. Nothing can replace the United Nations. There can be complementary functions, but the United Nations cannot be replaced. So that's what he said. I'm biased, I have to say, because I work with the United Nations. You feel that I'm passionate about my work. It's a great job. It's the greatest organization to work for, because we have these extremely high standards, which countries worked out in the framework of the United Nations, human rights standards, and all these great things to advocate and to make people aware that they're in their interests to implement. We believe the UN, but even theoretically, there is no other forum that brings the whole world together. We had 4 weeks ago, we had the MDG summit in New York. There were about 100 heads of state and government coming. Shortly after Copenhagen, we were very surprised they had the courage to come back. But they did come back because it was important, and the UN gave them a platform. It was everybody thinks it was a great summit with a great outcome. The United Nations had done extremely well. I'm very skeptic, because it is quite easy to commit and to come up and give great speeches. But the proof of the pudding is in the eating. The success of the summit will be in the implementation of the outcome. And this is where the UN is very weak. We are strong in bringing people together, in achieving results, in defining outcomes, but we are quite weak in implementation. This is when politicians go back home after they have promised a lot, and they are inundated by their national problems, and they forgot what they have promised, so they are just distorted, and they just do not implement what they have promised. And there's very little of accountability. We cannot force anybody. Unless something has been adopted under Chapter 7 of the Security Council, there is very little accountability. There's hardly any peer review in the United Nations. Member states don't want this. So every implementation is voluntary. It's difficult to push states. So there's a lot of weaknesses. Nevertheless, the convening power is unique. And I don't see how that can be replaced. The G20 are a huge challenge for us, a huge challenge. And especially until Pittsburgh, when they really produced, and when a lot of people thought this is going to be the new direction. In the meantime, what I hear out in the world is much more skeptical about the G20. I think they have contributed quite a lot, but the question is, how do we bring them together with the United Nations? How can we combine this efficiency of a small group with the legitimacy of the United Nations? This is going to be the challenge.
Dean Wilson, you have a question?
Obama in India has been talking about the Security Council and India's participation. How representative do you think the Security Council is now in terms of an effective...
You want me to be frank?
Sure.
No, I think the Security Council is not representative anymore. But the United Nations started out with 55 countries. And the charter was designed in 60 years ago, 65 years ago already. In the meantime, the world has been developing very quickly, and the UN has also been developing. The UN, in fact, has been reforming itself along the line always. In the face of new challenges, we adapt to all the challenges quite flexibly, but some of the institutions have not been reformed. We have been talking about Security Council reform now for so many years, and we have not achieved it. There is a consensus that the Security Council needs to be reformed, but there is no consensus of how to do it. First, we have the 5 countries that have a veto right. It's very, very difficult to make them give up the veto right. Then we have the understanding that we have to bring in a lot of emerging countries. Just bring in more countries, have the regions better represented. But how to do it? There are several candidate countries that do not command consensus. Africa has not been able to come up with their 2 candidates. They have not been able to decide which 2 of the 3. There's almost 3 candidates in Africa: Egypt, Nigeria, and South Africa. But there will most likely only 2 positions for South Africa. They have not been able to decide that. Then, will Japan ever pass the veto of China? India versus Pakistan, huge questions. In Europe, Germany, the Italians immediately started filibustering, or I shouldn't say filibustering, maneuvering against Germany, building up a big coalition of countries which is impeding the 2/3 majority needed in the Security Council. So whereas we all know that the Security Council needs to be reformed, there is no consensus yet in which direction to go. So I cannot tell you when that will happen.
Are there other questions? Yeah.
Thomas,
Here.
You mentioned that the big challenge from Copenhagen that was clear is that in order to confer legitimacy, you have to have a broad base. But in order to make decisions, you need a core constituency. And so my question is, what has changed or what is likely to change in the UN to allow it to become more effective at actually taking decisions going forward? Because you're caught between the two. And it also seems to me that that's been part of the history of the UN from the very beginning.
We do have a body in the political field of the Security Council. The Security Council is effective. It has been taken decisions under Chapter 7, which have been implemented directly. So there is efficiency in the Security Council. Where we lack it is the economic and social domain. There we don't have it. Because the ECOSOC has never lived up to its expectations. This is the big problem. So when the financial crisis happened, the UN was not in a position to give a coherent response, because we just didn't have the constituents. So we had this commission last year, the so-called Stiglitz Commission, which came up with an idea of a global economic and social council, which is a good idea. But the way they phrased it made it impossible to implement, because they said it should be on the same level as the General Assembly and the Security Council. That means you have a charter debate. You have to rewrite the charter. That means the charter will have to be ratified again by 100. It's a 30, 40-year timeline here. So to do something like this without a charter reform might be possible. For example, I was on a very interesting ECOSOC retreat last week and on the CEB this week. And there was a lot of good discussion exactly around your question. And I think I see a way forward now. I'm not sure whether we can sell this way forward to all our constituents. But we could work with ECOSOC. The 2005 outcome document of the summit reformed ECOSOC. And we are reviewing the reform of ECOSOC this year. So that's a window of opportunity. Then the big theme of the General Assembly for the year is global governance. How to make global governance more efficient. So there are already 2 streams coming together. Now, if we, for example, manage to reduce the ECOSOC, which right now has 54 member states, to 27, half it, and make these 27 members representative, represent constituents, we would do the trick. They might be pretty much the same members as the G20, these 27, but they would really represent, like in the IMF. In the IMF, Brazil is representing a whole lot of Latin American countries that feel represented, and that's fine. Brazil in the G20 represents nobody except Brazil, so all the others do not feel represented. But if we can come up, for example, with an ECOSOC of 27, with a constituency system where the 27 countries really all represent their constituents and they have some mechanism of decision making, that might be able to work. And then we would have this global economic and social forum that the Stiglitz Commission has proposed without a charter change. We could do this quite easily. And this is something, to be very true, I've only been thinking of the last few days, because some of ideas have just come together in the last week, which make this seem possible, I would not throw this out. So this would be the way out.
Any other questions? Yeah, one more question in the back there. Elizabeth? Yep.
Thank you very much, because I was actually going to ask a bit about what you just talked about, the ECOSOC 27. What I want to ask you now is what do you think of the G20's increasing, expanding work in the development issues? Do you think it's a good thing for the G20, a bad thing for the UN? Do you think it's making a bad name for the G20 and it should stick to strictly economic and financial matters? Thank you.
I cannot give you a really authoritative answer here. The G20 so far has only been dealing with financial issues. There they have been quite successful. This is the first time now that they are dealing with a larger agenda on the basis of a development working group in the G20. We'll see what happens now in Seoul. This might also be a cooperation, special cooperation between Korea and the Secretary General, that they expanded the agenda so that the UN has something to bring to the table. The next chair of the G20, France, that's going to take over on November 12th, has not yet said what exactly they want to do. They have told us they will look into innovative financing for development, find new sources to raise the money to finance the national development strategies that the countries have been designing, and which have not been financed in the past, because there has not been a means. So there are opportunities. I don't want to write them off. An efficient G20 is in all our interest, even the UN interest, because I don't see them as a competitor. If we play it right in this global governance scheme, we can complement each other and work together. We cannot waste any resources. We really have to put resources together.
Let's all give Thomas Stelzer a hand of applause. We wish him well in Seoul career, and you do great justice to your SAIS education.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you. I think the second panel will come up. It's great to come down and do this. Are you flying out tonight? Going right on to Seoul? No. Oh, okay. Thank you.
See you next week.
Yeah, please. You come down.
Come to you.
But not for dinner. I'll see you on the 16th. Have a safe trip.
Okay. Bye-bye. All the best. What I wanted to say still, one thing, if somebody said there's always an interest to come to the United Nations, if you have any questions which you think I can help you with, feel free to contact me.
Well, I'm just delighted to add my welcome to all of you tonight. I'm Bonnie Wilson, Associate Dean for Student Affairs at SAIS. I always like to say that I have the best job in the world because I get to deal most directly with SAIS students. And what an incredible group of students they are. They come from all over the world, and their interests span the globe. But the thing that links them together is the desire to make the world a better place. And they've come to SAIS to get the knowledge and the skills to do that. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for your interest in SAIS. We happen to think, quite modestly, that our institution, with campuses on 3 continents, is the finest school of international relations in the world. And we want you to learn more about it. In particular, we want you to find out more about the possibility, the opportunity of putting together a year in Italy at our Bologna campus and a year in Washington. and for a few lucky ones, having that paid for by fellowships such as the Niarchos Fellowship. Please come learn more about our program. The Bologna DC option is unique and truly offers an exceptional experience both academically and culturally, as you'll gather from our panel. But find out more about SAIS. Come visit our campus here in Washington. Attend some classes. Participate in some of our evening lectures that are open to the public. Get to know our students. Get to know our alums. We're very proud of what we do at SAIS, and we very much want you to consider being a part of it. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Sydney Jackson, our Director of Admissions, and to our panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie. Just for those of you who don't know, I am the Director of Admissions for the SAIS DC campus. We also have a Director of Admissions in the Bologna campus. His name is Nelson Graves. He's fairly new, so most all of the non-U.S. or all the non-U.S. students who apply to the SAIS or the Bologna Center will be going through his office and be dealing with him, but I'll give more information on him later on. I want to express my gratitude to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation again and the Woodrow Wilson Center for putting this on. This is great from an admissions standpoint. You couldn't ask for a better, I guess, perfect storm to have these institutions come together to help us as well. And a special thank you to Ashley Rogers in our development office who helped put this on too. So with that, we'll move forward. We have, as you see here, alumni and current students at SAIS who have agreed to be on our panel. And what better way to sell the school than to have people who had the lived experience. I'm going to just briefly have them introduce themselves, kind of tell us something about, for alumni, where you work and what you do. If you're a current student, what concentration you're in. Maybe also tell us why it is you selected SAIS. And I'm sure in your comments you'll touch upon things like the networks you develop, the bonds, relationships, the unique interdisciplinary curriculum we offer, the world-class faculty, the locations and the access each of these locations, Bologna and New Washington offered you, and the diversity of the student networks you found here. So maybe we just start off with Patrick and do a quick intro.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Patrick Flanagan. I come from Ireland, just outside Dublin. I guess the reason why I chose SAIS was because of the policy focus of the education. In my undergrad, I studied finance and commerce in Dublin, and afterwards I worked for a summer at the Irish Embassy here in DC, and there I kind of got appreciation for the dynamics of Washington DC and also the education opportunities here in DC. I was very fortunate then to meet a person who was then currently attending SAIS, and I learned a bit more about the education offered at SAIS. I kind of left that a bit in the back burner for a while, and I studied for a master's in Aberystwyth in Wales. Aberystwyth, it's a home of academia for international relations in the UK, and it was the first centre in the world. But what it lacked in some ways was the policy focus, and that's one of the reasons, and I guess the principal reasons why I decided to come to SAIS. SAIS kind of integrates the economics that are so prevalent in the world today, especially in the recent years, with the international relations and specific fields of study. My specific field of study here at SAIS is international development studies and international economics, and I try to combine two interests of mine, which are monetary reform in the EU today and development aid. And they don't combine so well, but you kind of get two different aspects of academic enlightenment in many respects. Why I chose Bologna is I just went to visit it. I visited 2 open days there, and you can kind of fall in love with the city very quickly. It's the heart of Italy. It's the bella vita, the beautiful life in some ways, and it gives you an opportunity to take not take a year out is the wrong word. It gives you an opportunity for academic enlightenment before coming to DC. DC can, from what I've experienced so far, can be quite hectic, and you're jumping from one conference to another conference. And Bologna gives that time to deepen your academic knowledge before you're entrusted into life here in DC.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cordelia Chestnut. I'm a Danish second-year master's student here at SAIS. I was in Bologna with Patrick, Stamatis, and Sina. Before coming to SAIS, I did my bachelor's degree at the University of Copenhagen in political science, and I did a master's degree at Columbia University in political science as well as a Fulbright scholar. And many people say, why do you want to do a second master's? Well, I wanted to actually work in a professional environment, and in order to do so in an international professional environment, I felt like I needed the network that SAIS could provide. I think SAIS is among the very top of graduate schools in the world that provides an extensive network within our field. The Niarchos Foundation very graciously supported me in my internship between the 2 years, first year in Bologna, second year in SAIS here in DC, which I spent at the United Nations headquarters in New York, working for the Office for Disarmament Affairs on interesting things. I helped organize a conference on nuclear disarmament in Japan and develop a project on armed violence and development in Asia. So altogether, why did I choose SAIS? Well, I liked the combination that it offered of Europe and America. Being an EU citizen, I felt like SAIS had the double advantage of giving you a sense of what would the job market be, both in Europe and in America. I'm a conflict management student, which means that I specialize in both the theories and the practices of how you work in dealing with conflict internationally. And through my SAIS education, I'll be traveling to Asia in the fall and winter of 2010-11, looking at the practical steps to take in order to pursue conflict management. So I think in terms of a professional perspective, SAIS gives you the advantage of an extensive network, a great academic training, as was alluded to before, but also a social experience and huge friendship group of friends, especially if you go to Bologna. You'll hear this many times if you're considering whether to go to Bologna for the first year or stay in DC. I mean, it's basically like 200 of your best friends that you travel with across the Atlantic. They become your family to a certain extent. These guys have walked me home late at night after parties. But we study hard and we play hard. We have a great balance. And I think that makes for I can say, having been at Columbia at the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences there, it's a much more enjoyable life having having friends who care about you and not just being stuck with the head in the book, which we also do. But with that, I'll turn it over to Stamatis.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stamatis Koostas. I'm a national of Greece. I come from the North Aegean island of Chios. This is where I was raised and where I got into international relations due to the proximity of Turkey, I guess. I decided to study international relations at an early age, and thanks to funding from the UK Department for Education and Skills, I managed to do that at University College London, where I did international relations and Russian. In London, I decided that what I really wanted to do is international relations policy, so I started being very interested in the UN. I pursued an internship with the Permanent Mission of Greece to the UN in New York. Then I moved to Moscow for a year, where I honed my Russian language skills and worked at the UNHCR there. Then I took a sabbatical leave to work for a year in Spain. I worked for a civil society organization through a European Commission project, and then worked at the re-election campaign of Prime Minister Zapatero. After finishing my undergraduate degree, I applied to SAIS in Bologna. I had numerous friends both from New York and from Moscow that had pursued that option, and I was very impressed by what they had to say and what they had to show after they had moved away from SAIS. So at SAIS, I am concentrating in international development, more specifically human development. My big interest is global health and education in developing countries. Last summer, I entered for Peruvian economist Hernando de Soto's think tank, the Institute for Liberty and Democracy. And during the semester, I'm at the Brookings working on education in developing countries at the Global Economy and Development Program. Other than the academic caliber of the faculty at SAIS, both in Bologna and in DC, and other than the great policy connections one can make via the faculty or the alumni, one of the defining factors for joining SAIS was the fact that there is a fellowship for Greek and EU students that can make a very top-notch education possible, and especially in times of crisis, not only for Greeks but for the rest of Europe, I guess. So I'm extremely grateful, and I'm happy to share the experiences from both sides of the Atlantic.
Thank you. I'm Scott Cantor. I'm graduated from SAIS in 2008, from Bologna in 2007. I want to just share with you a little bit about my decision-making and what informed my decision-making, but I wanted to share with you a little story about when I was applying to schools and I was sitting in your seats, going to different information sessions, learning about different graduate programs, and I came down, I applied to 4 or 5 schools, and ultimately, got accepted to some and came down to decision making, and it was a very terrifying decision. And at the time, you didn't realize, how easy of a decision it really was. But I can just appreciate from where you sit, it seems like a really daunting decision making process. But you should know that, quite frankly, whatever decision you make will be a good one for you. But we believe very strongly that we know that if you choose Johns Hopkins and SAIS, it'll turn out wonderful, as it has for all of us here. What made me choose SAIS specifically was the curriculum. As you may have learned, or you will learn, that SAIS is one of its distinguishing characteristics is the international economics component of our curriculum and the core curriculum that comes along with it. And to me, as someone that was considering graduate school, I knew that I needed to challenge myself and force myself to take classes that I might not otherwise choose. So I was giving myself some tough love, and I'll tell you my story. What I've done since SAIS, and you'll see how it really worked out for me. I was afraid of the economics, but I knew I needed to do it. So at SAIS, I started, took the first economics class, really enjoyed it and did quite well. Took another economics class, and then another, and then ultimately I majored, my concentration was in the international finance and in energy and environment. During my time at SAIS, I did several different internships, and give you a flavor of the types of internships and the types of jobs that come to SAIS students. I think my background is a nice representative sample. Sometimes you don't want your background to be a good representative sample, but the situation brought itself. So at SAIS, I did a summer internship at the Institute for International Finance. This is an organization here in DC that is made up of different investment banks, where they help set policy and help to try and influence organizations like the IMF and banking standards. Then I did an internship with the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which is a U.S. government agency that makes loans and does development finance. After SAIS, I went to work at Lehman Brothers. I was the last SAIS student ever hired at Lehman Brothers. That's my claim to fame. I was there for 3 months, and I don't need to explain to you what happened. After Lehman, I went to work at Booz Allen Hamilton, which is a consulting firm. I worked here in their DC office working on renewable energy project finance. And I've been at the World Bank for the last almost 20 months, going on 2 years, working in the carbon finance unit. So very nicely combining my finance and energy and environment concentrations. So that gives you a nice flavor of different things students get into. And then finally, the last point I just wanted to share with you, why choose SAIS. We talked a little bit about the network, and I know Tom is going to talk about this. But to me, it's more than a network. It's really a family. And it's hard to explain to you that isn't sitting in your shoes how we really feel about each other, and we've never met. But I guarantee you that we will go back and have 2 drinks, and we will carry on like family. And if they needed anything from me or I needed anything from them, that if I picked up the phone or called them, they would be the first to help me, and I'd be the first to help them. So we think of it more than just a network, but really as an alumni family.
I guess I'm the old man of the group up here. My name's Tom Tesluk. I graduated SAIS in 1982 and graduated the Bologna Center in 1981. I'm also chairman of the Bologna Center's Advisory Council, and I've been a member of that council for a little over 10 years. A little bit about my background and what I did when I left SAIS. The first job I took was with American Express Company. I worked in the office of the chairman on trade and services issues and did a lot of traveling back and forth to Washington to work with USTR. That lasted about 4 years. That also involved a little bit of international public relations and communications work on behalf of the chairman, who was positioning himself as sort of a trade policy wonk. So he did a lot of speeches before the OECD and that sort of thing. After that, I joined Lehman Brothers. Okay. I spent 5 years living in Milan, where we opened up a new office, did some corporate finance work, and very quickly got shunted off into a job that nobody at the time wanted, which was working with some companies that wanted to get cell phone licenses, whatever those were. I mean, when they called us from New York and said it's a cellular project, we literally thought they meant biotechnology. Turned out it was a really good thing for me because we ended up getting some licenses in Europe, and I left Lehman and went to work for one of those companies that was in the partnership, and came back to New York and ran their international business development for another 4 or 5 years, adding more licenses to the package until that company was sold. When that ended, I started my own consulting company and started working in international business development, primarily through putting together global partnerships between American companies and foreign companies to help them develop new business opportunities in foreign markets, and sometimes bringing foreign companies into this country. The thing I would say about my career overall is that, as you can tell, it's fairly eclectic. I mean, I could never have sat down and mapped it out when I was sitting at SAIS in my second year trying to figure out what I was going to do. But the thing you have to understand about a SAIS degree and a SAIS education is that it precisely prepares you for that kind of possibility. I'm going to say that again. It precisely prepares you for that kind of possibility. That is profoundly different from the experience you will have at an MBA program or some other kind of international studies program. Now, as to Bologna itself, you've heard a little bit about the impact that Bologna has on people. I had no idea what I was getting into when I went to Bologna. I was trying to decide between the London School of Economics for their master's degree program and Bologna. And what I knew first is that I had been at LSE as an undergraduate for part of my junior year, so I knew that I had a great time there. I also knew that I wanted to be overseas again, and that I wanted to have the experience of working with students from other countries. But when I got to Bologna, what I found out very quickly was that it was a 50-50 mix, 50% Americans, 50% non-Americans. And you don't really pick this up from reading the literature, but that has a profound impact. Unless you're the kind of person who never talks to anyone, who doesn't enjoy discussing anything, that's going to take you and literally stand you on your head, because these students get together and they talk about the issues, they talk about policies, they talk about current events, they talk about theory. And if you're holding on to ideas which are basically rubbish, you're going to find that out very quickly. So you learn to toss out what's unimportant and you learn from each other, and you learn to hold on what's central to you and what's core to your belief system. And so the education that you get at a place like the Bologna Center takes place as much as in the cafe, in the trattoria, in the mensa, as it does in the classroom and in the lecture hall. And that's terribly important. The other thing that the literature doesn't really tell you is just how close the relationship between faculty and students are, because those relationships take place across the board in all kinds of different settings and all kinds of different environments. So it's a profound bonding experience. And I can tell you quite honestly, my class is having its 30th anniversary next year. We had our 25th some years ago. On the 25th anniversary, we had dinners in Washington and New York so people could get together. I hadn't seen some of those people in 20, 25 years. And yet when we got together, it was as if somehow we had been together the day before. We picked up stories and conversations that literally we had enjoyed in Bologna. And, you know, I went to a very small prep school, a very small college out on the West Coast, and I don't have anything like the relationships from those schools that I do with my classmates at Bologna. So it's a profoundly, it can be a profoundly life-altering experience. And the interesting thing is that you don't lose that. As Scott said, you feel that bond not only across your class year, but with anyone who's gone to the Bologna Center. And we started a couple of years ago an organization in the U.S. for alumni. It's kind of an informal thing, but we call ourselves Amici di Bologna. Scott's on the governing council. And it's basically created by alumni and run by alumni. But we get together once a year in New York for a great big dinner and reception. And people come from not only across the country, but they come from across the Atlantic to attend this. And they don't come because the food is great, because it's not, but they come because they want to be together. They want to get together with the faculty. They want to get together with their classmates. And they just want to be in the same space where everybody's holding on to the same experience. So consider seriously the Bologna Center as a place where you're investing a year of your time. And I promise you won't regret that.
Hi, I'm Sina and I'm from Denmark. And I have here a long list of the reasons why I chose SAIS. And as we've been going through the panel today, I've been crossing them all out. Just meaning to say that I think we all agree on this. But I can think of two reasons that I came to SAIS in particular. SAIS sort of respected what I came from, and it gave me the opportunity to do what I hadn't done before. And so I have a background in arts and linguistics, and I desperately needed to learn something about the world and about economy. So that meaning SAIS took me out of my comfort zone and expanded my comfort zone. And so if you're up for challenges, I think SAIS is a good place. So I'm a China concentrator and recently did my internship in Shanghai about renewable energy source implementation. And that was in an urban setting, and this winter I'll be going with the school to a more rural setting of China where we'll look at how we set up a big hydropower projects and how that affects the environment and how it affects the civil society and the people around it. So two things I want to point out about SAIS: the skills you'll get. I know it's really dry, and I'm sorry, I'm the dry end. This is a school with the facilities and capabilities to give you the tools you need. That just meant a lot to me. And that means you have a TA. Patrick has been my TA. He knows what I'm talking about. Like, you can ask questions all the time, and we do ask questions all the time. I've had my professor stay in her office until 11 p.m. just because she wanted me to understand. So I just think that that's important. One final thing that I think people haven't touched on is you grow as a person. And so I think on top of having all these very tangible skills that I'm sure are very marketable and it's good for your profession, then you're just presented to an awful lot of challenging situations, and that makes you grow. Well, I would like to think it makes us grow, but that I think is really valuable. So that you suddenly sit and have lunch with a Russian professor, that is something that, so you need to think about Russia if you haven't done that. So I like what it was being said, that, well, you learn how to hold on to your own ideas and your own values. Well, I must say, I don't know if you share this with me, but sometimes I just don't know where I'm standing. But I assure you, you'll be forced to take a stand, and that's valuable as well.
Okay, great. Excellent opening comments. I hope it jogs some questions out there. I'm going to open the floor up to questions for our panelists. Feel free to ask anything. It could be, again, admissions related even, or related to their lives, what they're doing now. Anyone?
I have a question.
Okay.
I think on the sign on the end, is there any difference between the functional, the concentrations versus the regional concentration of China or the Asia studies? Does the regional studies pigeonhole you in any way, I guess, or is there any difference between the two, that kind of a macro perspective?
So, back me up, Sydney, but on this master you have to have a certain amount of econ courses, you have to have a language, and they are core courses, so that's what we all need to pass. But I, being a China concentrator, means I need to have 4 courses relating to China and 2 to Asia, so that would be specific China requirements, whereas if you do something like energy and environment, then you would have to have 4 courses probably in energy and environment, and 2 relating to something else that they set up. So there are requirements. Whether that pigeonholes you, whether that makes you focus, depends on the day. But no. I mean, I don't. I prefer to be confident in what I'm doing. And I don't feel pigeonholed, quite the contrary. But it's really up to you, I think.
I would just add to that, that the concentration you choose may give you an advantage when you're trying to bid for classes. In the second year specifically, there's a lot of specialized courses. And, for example, I being a conflict management concentrator, it's easier to get, there's preferences within your concentration so that people who are particularly interested within those areas are allowed into those classes. On the other hand, I have many friends who feel like they would want to take all sorts of different classes, and they do a general IR specialization, and they're happy with that and can take whatever classes they want. So it's basically on what you're most interested in.
I would just say as well that generally you would have to do 4 or 5 classes in your concentration, but SAIS gives you the flexibility to take many classes outside of your concentration. One of the benefits of your concentration is that a lot of the departments will have their own field trips that you will be given preference to. So the international development department that I'm a part of are going to China during the fall break. There are other departments that we're going to the Philippines or to Japan, and being a part of those concentrations gives you preference when you apply for those positions or for those trips.
Justin Cosmides, prospective student, looking at some of the joint degree programs. Have any of you had experience with that? Friends, anyone doing that, pros and cons within the school balance?
Are you thinking about the Wharton, or like when you say joint degrees? Okay.
I can speak to it. I didn't do it, but I had several classmates that did joint degrees with business school and with law school. Obviously, it's a great opportunity, and it gives you a leg up. especially if in those fields. So if you're a lawyer and you have an additional master's degree from SAIS, that's going to give you a nice leg up in the process of finding a job. The same way, I think, with people in finance, of course, that adds significantly to the burden of resources that you'll need to put together to make it happen. That goes without saying. I would like to say, though, if you're thinking about an MBA, this is a very practical and tangible. You can do a semester in Bologna, and you can actually make it your last semester. And I have some friends that have made that work out very well for them, because in the MBA recruiting cycle, very often by the time you're in so you would need to do a year and a half at SAIS. You could do your first year in Washington, and Bonnie will correct me if I'm wrong, but I know students that have done this, so maybe they've had exception, but you do your first year in Washington, then you would go to, let's say, Wharton or to whatever MBA school that you're doing the joint degree, do a year and a half there, and then finish up your SAIS degree in Bologna, which would be a wonderful opportunity, especially if you had the good fortune of having your job lined up in your first semester of the fall.
And the only thing I'll add on to that is that Scott's right in terms of the sequencing of courses. It's really good, I think, to kind of apply independently to both schools at the same time. I think because we have an academic advisor who can work with you on that, specific for joint degree students, kind of work that first year, one semester kind of sequence out for you. So I think it's quite helpful to kind of apply simultaneously to both institutions.
Come up and see me afterwards. I'll give you my business card, and I'll get you in touch with some of my classmates that did the SAIS Wharton, if that's what you're thinking about, and they'll tell you exactly what you want to know.
Okay.
Can I just add one thing to that? I didn't specifically do a dual degree, but I'm doing my second master's, and I would just say end up with the course that you want to concentrate on. I did political science first, which is general, and then international relations, more specific, and within that I'm specifying. And I think it's good to end with the set of networks, contacts, and the academic training that you'll need once you go into the professional career. But I definitely think it's a value to be able to have several skills in the competitive workforce. Yeah.
Well, I have a question. Maybe you can talk a bit about delve a little more into internships over the summer, and so you started talking about that a bit, but maybe just snippet about what your internships were like and what you pulled out of it. Anyone?
Where do we want to start? Should we go down the line?
Yeah, it's fine. Sure.
So I went back to Ireland for the summer. My father was a bit sick, so I spent some time with the family. But for August, there's pre-term here in DC, and I was a teaching assistant for a pre-term here. So I was teaching assistant for macroeconomics, and I was just kind of add that one of the benefits of SAIS is that you're allowed to become, their students do become the teaching assistants, and this kind of challenges the student further to understand the subject you should be able to teach, or you can be able to teach, and that's, I guess, the benefit that I had over the summer. But I think Cordelia and Stamats will have more enriching detail about their internships here in America.
Patrick enriches the life of all of us. So. No, as I mentioned before, I was at the UN headquarters in New York for the summer with the Office for Disarmament Affairs. I was with the regional disarmament branch, which covers Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And I was on the Asia part of that office, and for a few months I helped develop projects specifically in Asia on armed violence and development, and helped organize a conference on nuclear disarmament in Japan. And I must say that even though in the beginning it was very overwhelming, perhaps, being at the UN, such a big, diffuse organization we heard about before, but after a while I did get a substantial amount of responsibility. My boss left for his every 5-year UN employees get a month's leave, and they just leave. And he left me basically with his job, and he's a high-level official. And that worked out really well, and it's gone to the point where some of my boss there is trying to see whether we can create some sort of job for me with the UN later on next year, perhaps, because you're not allowed to, don't know whether you know anyone who's interested in this, but if you do an internship with the UN, you aren't allowed to be employed there within the next 6 months, because it's a way of trying to reduce the Okay, corruption. No, but I could go into this in a lot of detail if anyone is specifically interested. But for young people like ourselves interested in that sort of career, there's basically the JPO option where you're sponsored by your government within the UN, or you do the competitive exam. So anyway, I'm looking into options there. It's definitely rewarding. And as I said, I was supported by the Niarchos Foundation. And that's another thing I'd like to say. The Bologna Center Advantage is also an incredible career services office, which basically has drop-in hours. You go in there, you have a application you're writing, a CV that needs tweaking. They have high standards for your resume. It really gets streamlined. They say there's a SAIS resume now, and it is a high-quality document that people can see, okay, it's from SAIS. That means something. And, you know, anybody I knew at Bologna who wanted an internship, who did the preparation, got an internship, and 9 out of 10 times with the place they wanted to be at. So, yeah, that's a great benefit to the program.
So last year I secured the first international development internship that was offered for the Institute for Liberty and Democracy, which is Hernando de Soto's think tank. De Soto, if you're not familiar, is the Peruvian economist that pioneered the field of property rights and institutional reforms with regards to the poor in the developing countries. So I was basically working on institutional and property rights reforms that would legally empower the poor and create a more inclusive market economy. I was specifically working on the contract that the ILD had with the government of Libya, which was a challenging case. Both from the institutional perspective, the challenges were an Islamic Republic which is socialist at the same time, with a very interesting Islamic law background. So there was a lot of theoretical legal work research, and then it was rather multidisciplinary. You had to do a lot of economics in order to find out, you know, the size of the extra legal sector, to map which are the areas geographically and demographically where the biggest challenges were faced. And one of the big advantages of the internship was the fact that there was a Libyan delegation that came to Lima to be trained on extra legal issues, and this also puts you into the understanding of creating a training program to quite influential people that will end up hopefully implementing some of these reforms. SAIS is extremely helpful in securing internships at really interesting and influential, one would say, places. So through the network and through the institutional connections that it has.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, I was in Shanghai this summer and also sponsored by the Niarchos Foundation. And I'll be happy to answer any questions on scholarships and in general. We can maybe meet once this is over. But as for what I did in Shanghai, that was on joint US-China collaboration on clean energy, which, as I'm sure you all know, is a hot topic and an important one. And I can only say that it's a dynamic place, China, and getting the foundation's support for this scholarship made it possible for me to leave my Tibetan plateau where I used to be in China and go to Shanghai. So I spent some years in rural China learning Chinese and acquainting myself with the culture. But then this was quite a change to go to Shanghai. They have coffee and they have metros, skyscrapers, and Westerners, which the latter being the most shocking part of it. So I was trying to build up a clearinghouse website where we simply make the say wind energy who does that best and what techniques can we use, and like what are best practices that others can learn from. Just basically trying to make knowledge sharing on green energy as widely published as possible in China. And it was very interesting from a private sector point of view to see how dynamic that field is. And for the first time in a very long time of studying China, it made me very optimistic.
Questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, what do you think is the most challenging thing during your time in SAIS, and how does it help you decide your future career, like what you want to do in future? Thanks.
Most challenging thing at SAIS?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I could start off on how it helps you determine your career. Maybe somebody else will talk about the challenges. I can't quite think of that. But so coming into SAIS, I knew I wanted to do something related to international relations, conflict management, which maybe is a little bit broad. But while I was doing courses in Bologna, I started developing this interest in nuclear disarmament, which wasn't really just from there. I used to write on that in my undergraduate work, but I had some professors who, you have a general curriculum, you find out what you really like in that curriculum, and you have to choose topics for research papers, let's say. And then, you develop an interest, a more specific interest within your concentration. For me, it was nuclear disarmament. And then I applied to the UN headquarters for an internship. I think I applied to the Security Council division that everybody does, because everyone thinks the Security Council is the cool place, but really it's the boring one, because they just have to sit and read files. It's really boring. But they placed me at the Office for Disarmament Affairs by looking at my CV, by looking at which courses I'd taken, by looking at my previous experience. And that really honed me in on what I want to do. And now I know pretty much what sort of career I want to take. So I'd say that the courses that you choose, the specific choices you make within your courses, and maybe your internship helps give you even more of an idea of what it is you want to do post-SAIS.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Very briefly, I mean, in my case, I went to a very, let's say, academic undergraduate institution, and the same thing happens with people that go to university in Europe. And the main challenge was to move from a very sort of analytical, long paper requirement theory and background to being able to basically influence someone through a 2-page policy brief. And this is something that you will learn really well, and something that is actually very helpful, because if you actually apply for real jobs, you cannot include a writing sample of 30 pages or 50 pages with your application, but only a 2-page document, I guess.
Well, I just had one question, because I know we're pressed for time, and I know it seems like we're exhausted with questions in the crowd here. But for the alumni, I'd be interested to know, after leaving SAIS, was there ever an aha moment where something went off, something happened in your job that made you think, wow, that professor or that discussion I had in class is really coming to truth here, and it's amazing, finally, that I could see how things are coming together. Because I know often you process a lot of information, and until, as a practitioner, it comes together. Sometimes it doesn't connect. But
well, I would say that the one thing that, if I had an aha moment, I mean, everything in my career since I left SAIS has had an international theme to it. And that means that I've been working with people outside the United States from the get-go. And I think one of the things that really helped me a lot in being able to adapt to that and be successful working with teams of people outside the U.S. is the experience in Bologna. Because you very quickly learn that if you're going to be happy and successful in Bologna, you're going to learn how to get along with people who are not from your own country. And you make very close friends. It's not just a truce. You actually make close friendships and close relationships. And I didn't think about it at the time, but I realized that those skills served me very, very well in a long career of doing international business.
As far as the aha moment, actually, two answers to the question. The first is my job at the World Bank is actually exactly like SAIS almost every day. I work with SAISers. My boss is a SAIS, the big boss of 80 people in my department is a SAIS grad. The deputy is a SAIS grad, the director of communications, and a few other SAISers. And then my direct colleagues are also SAIS grads. So we sit in conference rooms working on Excel sheets just like we did at SAIS. So it's very much every day is an aha moment. But actually, you asked an interesting question, aha moment, and I'll switch it back. And we've talked a lot about the academics, and we've touched on sort of the social element of it. But I'll end on the more social element of the degree and the family that I was talking about earlier. Was in Seoul for a wedding last month, and there were 20 of my classmates there for another classmate's wedding, and we had flown in from Europe, from the Middle East, and from different parts of the United States, all to be together. And as Tom mentioned, we all just pick up just where we left off the last time we saw each other, which is pretty much the aha moment, and that's what you get when you sign up for a SAIS degree. You get a lifestyle and a lifetime of these types of friendships and these types of careers.
Excellent. Okay. Well, great. I want to thank our panelists. They did a great job tonight. Thank you very much. Now, I believe we have a reception that's across the way, so I believe you just come out the door, go straight across the hallway, and we have some food and light refreshments. And just want to tell you any prospects who are still thinking about application. January 7th is our deadline for the SAIS DC, through the SAIS DC campus. And for those other individuals, you're looking at a February deadline who are applying through the Bologna campus. So we could talk more about that, but I'll be around for questions. For Americans applying to Bologna in particular, January 7th, that's right, yes. So just keep that in mind. But I want to thank you all for coming tonight, and I will be around for questions. So thank you again to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation and Woodrow Wilson Center. Thank you.